Abramson presents a series of arguments that support the notion that there is a crisis in comparative psychology. We have chosen to concentrate on one of his arguments, specifically the idea that comparative psychology is in crisis because nobody calls it comparative psychology anymore. Where is the comparison in comparative cognition? Hoddos and Campbell in 1969 pointed out that such questions such as fundamental misunderstanding of how evolution works. That fundamental misunderstanding is the idea of scala naturae, a rank of ordering of species. Camille in 1987 pointed out that it is much more reasonable and fruitful if we look at natural history as a starting point for our comparative questions. For example, one might expect a difference between food storing memory to solve problems, but one should not expect differences between storers and non-storers on their use of memory for color to solve a problem. Comparative cognition, evolutionary psychology, integrative biology, or behavioral ecology has sort of subsumed traditional comparative psychology. It's not really surprising. This is part of the maturation of the field and the maturation of the types of answers researchers seek to comparative questions. Comparative psychology, comparative cognition, or whatever one wishes to call it, has become a fundamental approach to the evolution of the scientific analysis of behavior and cognition. Article number 6, A Clarion Call or a Swan Song, by Craig Billard and Andrew Gallup. Once a thriving subdiscipline in psychology, Abramson describes what seems to be a field in peril and offers suggestions to enhance the presence of comparative psychology at the undergraduate level. As pessimistic as this message sounds, it may just represent an adaptation to a changing scholarly environment. Currently, if one searches on Amazon.com utilizing the advanced search for books, animal behavior brings up 42,362 listings. If one examines the first 100 of these, 17 textbooks come up. It seems the field of animal behavior is holding on in place of comparative psychology, though its refugium lies primarily within the disciplines of biology and zoology. Despite the apparent lack of coursework and formal training in comparative psychology, research in this field is not short supply. This can be evidenced by the increased number of journals devoted to publishing research taking a comparative perspective to behavior and cognition. In summary, we agree with Abramson in the need to unite in the maintenance and development of comparative psychology and evolutionary approaches to the study of behavior, specifically within the field of psychology. However, attempts to explicitly hold onto the name comparative psychology seem largely fruitless, and perhaps greater traction could be made by modifying curricular constraints to enhance the enrollment of psychology undergraduates within existing courses in animal behavior. Article number 7, Forgetting the Past and Neglecting the Future, by Marco Vasconcelos and Josefa N. Pandeirada. Abramson clearly identifies the major problem faced by comparative psychology: to find the next generation of comparative psychology students. We agree that the field has become less appealing to students, but the main problem is upstream. We do not need a new generation of students if there are no professors to teach them. In other words, our worries are in the current and past generation of graduate students struggling to find stable academic positions. So, who do we inspire? There is no obvious answer, but nothing is more compelling than practicals. A series of well-organized, self-contained hands-on lab experiments focusing on key concepts and technique are usually the sparkle students need. Also, we should never forget what we have accomplished so far. Comparative psychology will only harm and constrain itself by limiting its scope to cases of palpable integration among species. By doing so, we will turn our back on a plethora of provocative behavioral phenomena. Consider, for example, non-neural organisms. Are they excluded from our studies by definition? All things considered, the absence of graduate programs specifically called comparative psychology is not worrisome in our view. Given the scope of the field, cross-departmental programs have more benefits than drawbacks. Article number 8, Comparative Psychology, a Perspective Rather Than a Discipline, by Cinzia Ciandetti and Walter Gervino. Relying on interspecies comparisons, comparative psychology complements developmental psychology and differential psychology, which are focused on interspecies comparisons. All are better conceived as integrable perspectives, we think, rather than disciplines. Behavior of organisms is studied by several disciplines. What makes psychology special is the application of the scientific method to the study of mental phenomena. Abramson's pessimism might be the consequence of the dominance of neural explanations, referring to proximal causes, over biological explanations, referring to the phylogenesis and ontogenesis of cognition and emotion. We are convinced that a comparative perspective on functions and mechanisms, not behaviors, can effectively balance neuroscience. As ethology and behaviorism mold together to support a more exhaustive and controlled study of animal behavior, comparative psychology should complement other perspectives and intersect various levels of analysis, such as neural, genetic, ecological, and evolutionary, in order to answer all of Tinbergen's questions. The full understanding of cognition and emotion will take place in a nameless, neutral field, fed by specialization disciplines but a step away from them. Article number 9, The Fractionalization and Anthropocentric View of Comparative Psychology, by Murray Horn and Cameron Ryzek. Comparative psychology is dead, or at least maybe, if we do not recruit capable undergraduates. We must disagree with this prophecy that Abramson warns us about. The key to understanding the current state of comparative psychology is not to take the approach that it is a dying field, but to understand how the field can further evolve. According to Abramson, the division of the discipline into multiple sub-areas, including, but not limited to comparative cognition, ethology, biopsychology, and sociobiology, distracts from what was unique about comparative psychology, which is not necessarily true. One would not argue that the specializations of developmental, cognitive, or neuroscience takes anything away from what it means to be a psychologist, or that psychology as a discipline is at risk of fading away. The same is true for comparative psychology. Another point that Abramson argues strongly is that there should be an emphasis on the importance of connecting animal to human behavior. On one hand, this will potentially recruit more students who are interested in an applied field of research. On the other hand, Dewsbury suggested that making generalizations from animal to human was not appropriate for a true comparative psychologist. I think us as researchers have the most impact of recruiting students, according to Gallup. He sums it up just like, exciting research will do more for the future of the discipline than revisionist histories or calls for return to the true faith. We therefore must proclaim, long live comparative psychology, or whatever you want to call the discipline. Article number 10, If We Build It, Comparative Psychologists Will Come, by Jennifer Bonk, Eric Hofmaster, Zoe Johnson, and Sylvia Oriani. We agree that comparative psychology has suffered diminishing stature in the last several decades. However, we recognize that lack of engagement with the field stems at least in part from the following related issues neglected by Abramson. A serious lack of financial support for programs of research in comparative psychology, difficult access in subject populations, and changing norms regarding the ethical use of animal subjects in research. In addition, we question whether comparative psychology needs to remain a distinct subfield rather than allowing students to explore related topics from under the broad umbrella of other disciplines, such as animal behavior, zoology, ethology, behavioral ecology, comparative cognition, and evolutionary biology. Experiments with animal subjects cause us to question assumptions about human cognition and our place in the evolutionary process. There is no question that comparisons between species are illuminating, but they can be made within various subfields, such as evolutionary, cognitive, and developmental psychology. From our point of view, as long as the students are engaged in an area of study that can be defined as comparative, we have not lost undergraduates, but have potentially provided many more unique paths to the same future goals. In order to emphasize the importance of the field, we must continue to support comparative psychologists so that their contributions can be realized and publicized. It is also true that many promising young comparative psychologists end up moving into other areas, such as developmental and cognitive psychology, where research subjects are more accessible and affordable. If comparative psychologists are to remain engaged in the field, students must also be made aware of job possibilities outside the academia. In sum, we agree that comparative psychology is worth preserving, but we question the need to keep it separate from other related topics of study, and we emphasize a need to support junior scientists to become the valued researchers and instructors that will inspire others to follow in their footsteps. My personal experience in comparative psychology. I have been an undergraduate psychology student for the last 3 years at ULM. I remember taking a few higher level psychology classes in high school during my junior and senior years, and that's when I remember my earliest interest in the psychology field. However, I have also been extremely interested in the study of biology, especially mammals. And 4 years ago, knowing that there was a field that would allow me to work with animals and study psychology at the same time would have been a dream come true. I should mention that I grew up in Ecuador, a small country in South America, where the field of psychology is not as advanced as it is in the US. Therefore, finding any undergraduate courses related to the study of comparative psychology would have been impossible. As I recall, when I brought up the idea of studying animal and psychology together, none of my teachers or advisors could point me in the right direction, and it was quite frustrating. From that perspective, I totally understand why Abramson is so concerned about the study of comparative psychology being available to the public. In fact, it should be present in more than introductory textbooks, footnotes, or brief mentions of an encyclopedia, because the students know what they want to study. Comparative psychology, they just need some sort of guidance in order to get involved. Finally, when I started my undergraduate studies in psychology at the University of Louisiana Monroe, it was not until my senior year that I actually had the opportunity to take a class specialized in comparative psychology, and I cannot emphasize enough how important it would have been for me to know more about this field a couple of years back. I personally consider comparative psychology one of the most interesting, useful, and unique courses that can be offered at the university, and more students, graduate and undergraduate, should have easy access to the information, methodology, and overall this field. Additional problems. Animal behavior studies and animal psychology studies are used as synonyms for one another. However, animal behavior studies is much more diverse. It has a broader classification and is very specific for each type of animal. For example, marine or terrestrial mammals, amphibious or reptiles, carnivores or herbivores. Behavior is an evolutionary adaptive trait, and this is how animal behavior studies actually approach animal behavior. On the other hand, animal psychology studies is an advanced topic that requires previous behavioral understanding. Everyone plays catch-up trying to teach animal behavior studies and animal psychology studies at the same time during an academic course. Self-advising and how to get involved in comparative psychology. Several universities offer different classes that can be related to the comparative psychology field. For example, some core classes in psychology include comparative psychology by itself, intro to psychology, research laboratory, thesis program, research projects, psychostatistics, cognitive psychology, history and systems, advanced general psychology, psychological testing and measurement, clinical psychology, and clinical research. While core classes in other fields include ecology, biology, zoology, evolution, geography, environmental studies, genetics, animal behavior, animal physiology, statistics, and ethology.